Thank you all for joining us to talk about the preferred plan for the McKinley Grove project that we've been working on. My name's Brandon Riley. I'm the Director of Community Projects and Engagement for Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, joined by Aaron Tobin, our Assistant Director of Engagement. Um, what we wanted to go over with folks today is one, just kind of give an overview of the project in case people are new to kind of the project and the timeline that we've talked about. So making sure folks know what part of McKinley Park we're discussing, kind of doing a brief recap of the community engagement we've done to date and the feedback that we've gotten that have helped inform the plan that we're going to present to you all today. Then we're going to dive in and do a review of the preferred plan, kind of the overall plan, go over some pathway connection options, and then kind of dive into the details of the plan, and then have some time for questions and answers at the end. Just to give everyone a reminder or a sense of where we are in the project process. We started this project back in January of this year. In March, we had a focus group meeting with a lot of local kind of community stakeholders and community members. We also presented some ideas or tried to get some community feedback at the Earth Day presentation and put out a public survey just to get some initial thoughts about what people thought about the space and what they might want to see here. After that, starting in May, we developed some concepts based on that feedback. We presented it in June at a community meeting at the Shelter House, and also released another survey, posted things online to get people's feedbacks on the different concepts. We then captured all of that input and we used it to help develop our preferred plan. We first presented this last week on the 17th or 2 weeks ago. And we're doing this meeting as well, which is going to be recorded and put up on the Engage PGH website so people can, see what we're doing and offer some comments there. After this meeting, once we get kind of the final input from people, we'll refine the plan and then we'll start taking it into design development. So developing construction documents, going through the permitting process, et cetera, so we can put this out to bid and get it constructed, hopefully starting in the beginning of January 2026. There is at least one more meeting we will have to host as part of this process. That's the development activities meeting. Tentatively, we're projecting that would probably happen sometime in July, but we think that would be a good time to check back in with the community, see how the preferred plan has changed at all once we've gotten to kind of detailed design and really gotten into the nuts and bolts of how things are going to get put together. Sometimes things can shift. So it'd be good to kind of get it back out in front of the community and make sure that it's still the plan people are hoping for before we get too far. So just to kind of orient folks to the project area and where we're talking about, we're in McKinley Park. The project area we're discussing is in Upper McKinley. You can see Michigan Street, Delmont Avenue up here and Eldora Place. The pavilion and slide that was recently installed by the city, as well as the new trails that they had installed, as well as the rain garden basin and that stormwater infrastructure below Michigan Street that was installed, I think starting in 2018, 2019 is when it finished up. Sorry, 2020 is when it finished up. The project area we're talking about is this area here, where there had used to be a ball field. For folks that have been in the community for a long time, the backstop is still there. That's sort of the focus. As you can see the trail connections that come through this space, but really building off of the work that's been done, working our way down Chicken Hill towards the valley, towards Bousman Corridor and the amenities there. So this is just kind of more of a zoomed in detailed plan of that project area. This is the open lawn area we're discussing. There's a raised turnpike trail that was installed by Land Force in 2023, last year, to help reconnect the newer aggregate trails that were installed to the existing trail system. And there's the old backstop here in blue that was painted by Student Conservation Association at the same time. They also did some trail improvements to connect to the kind of outdoor classroom boardwalk space that's there now, and beyond to the trail system. There are two ongoing restoration areas that PPC is managing. One is the Pawpaw Grove that was installed just next to the outdoor classroom space, as well as the meadow restoration area that's bringing back some pollinator plants and some meadow plants. But this is really the focus of what we're talking about when we refer to it as the community grove. So this is just an image of that existing space. This is that open lawn area. You can see the Turnpike Trail in both of these images, the one to the lower right, as well as the larger image that was installed. And here's that blue backstop from that original baseball field, that community field that had been built by community members decades ago. That's still in place. That was painted because people have a nostalgic feeling of it and they wanted to see it highlighted. And then here to this area is that existing meadow restoration space that we're going to be trying to work within and preserve and protect. So we've done a lot of community engagement about the space, as we mentioned. We started back kind of around in April, asking people what kind of amenities they'd like to see. People identified things such as, they like seating, nature play elements, potentially a shade structure, lighting, which is something we looked into, and we can get into details about why it would be difficult to do here, but that's for later in the presentation. People also identified that they want to see opportunities for ecological restoration, areas for solitude, et cetera. That was some of the initial feedback we received. We then developed two concepts based on those ideas, trying to create a place that was informal, had opportunities for ecological restoration, areas for gathering, shade structures, et cetera, and presented those to the community in June. And then got additional feedback on those that kind of reinforced some of this original engagement that we did. And these are pretty much the takeaways from that meeting, from the engagement we've done to date. One was to keep this project simple. Less is more in a lot of ways. Let's keep it a usable space that adds something to the park, adds an amenity, but doesn't over-program the space or make it a regional draw for whatever reason. People really responded to the idea of expanding and enhancing ecological restoration and allowing this to also be a more natural space. They also thought it should be peaceful and contemplative, a more natural space that's generally quieter, but meant for informal gatherings, or a place where people can just find some peace and respite from daily life in a really natural setting. Another thing that came through was improving the connections to the Haberman Pavilion. That new pavilion that the city had just constructed, people wanted to see more direct connections from there down to this space. And also something that came through was keeping the backstop and really finding a better way to honor that community history. So those were kind of the takeaways that informed this preferred plan that we're going to present to you shortly. So this is the overall of the new preferred plan. A couple things we want to point out, kind of large plan moves, and then we'll dive into the more detailed version of the plan itself. But here you can see this new gathering space that we're creating. We'll dive into that in a second, but just to zoom out a bit in order to show you one of the first things we responded to is the need for expanded ecological restoration. You can see this is our existing kind of meadow restoration space. We wanted to expand that and convert a lot of that open lawn area into more native meadow or habitat. There's two reasons for that. One, to make a more naturalized space, but also will help us manage stormwater drainage that currently, if you're there in the site now, existing drainage patterns dump water into this open lawn space and make it kind of unusable. It gets very soggy, especially after major storms. So rerouting that drainage, finding ways to slow it down and collect it and infiltrate it in a natural setting, both allows us to create kind of a high and dry gathering space, but also encourages that ecological restoration piece that we're trying to achieve. The other thing we're responding directly to that we want to talk about in this plan, and we'll go into more detail, is pathway connections. How do we get from the Haberman Pavilion down here in a more direct way? Right now, the only way to do it is to get back onto Michigan Street, walk down to the Eldora or down to Delmont and get on the existing pathway system there to get down. It's not particularly direct, which results in people taking a lot of shortcuts, some of which are not particularly conducive to the environment, can cause erosion issues, et cetera, and not particularly safe. So we want to address those in a certain way. We come up with two options that we'll go into detail about how people can get down, which we will explain now. So the first option is creating a new pathway that aligns with the existing accessible route from Michigan Street to the pavilion. If you're familiar with the area, there's currently sort of a clearing, like a lawn clearing space between the trees here that connects to the new pathways and stairs that the city just constructed. So this option would provide a pathway and stair connection that connects you to that space. The benefits of this one are it avoids tree impacts because we're staying kind of out of the root zones of trees. We're in an open clearing already. It's also less susceptible to erosion, just the way the grades are working and how we're connecting to a recently installed asset. But obviously one of the cons, one of the downsides is it's not as direct. It's more direct than what's there today, but still a little bit circuitous to get to where you want to go. The second option we developed is a more direct route. This one would take you from sort of the bottom of the slide area down a series of steps and connect you to the new kind of reconstructed larger trail system down below. Obviously, the pros here, it's a much more direct connection to that lower path, gets you down there quicker. But there are a few cons. One, it would take us through trees. So there are potential tree impacts, root impacts in order to construct this. It's also much steeper. So that means it's probably more susceptible to erosion issues, which you've been in the park since we've been installing some of these improvements. Grade and erosion are real challenges to try and overcome. So something we need to be cognizant about there. So these are things that we're going to explore further. Some comments we received at our October 17th meeting was, why not both? Why not have one path that's a little bit easier to navigate for folks who might not be able to handle steep grades, but also recognize that people want to get down the slope as quickly as possible and providing an option for that as well, so they're not continuing to kind of create their own goat paths. So that was feedback we're going to take back. And as we launch into kind of the design development phase of this project and start figuring out construction aspects, those are two options we're going to explore to either provide both, and if not, find the one that's most feasible and most constructible and go with that. And obviously, we would circle back with the community at that point. Going into the detail of the site plan and the new proposed space we're creating. So as mentioned, we're trying to just create a very small, simple, level lawn space that can accommodate some informal gathering. It can accommodate, kids who might want to throw a football around, kick a kickball around, etc. But it's not meant to be a heavily programmed, heavily active space. It's about 50 feet wide by 100 feet long, so not particularly large, about the size of a basketball court. But really, it's just meant to be a nice, pleasant space that is dry, that is kind of tucked within this sort of natural surroundings where the community can gather and where you can sit there quietly and observe nature. You can have picnics there, small community gatherings, but it's really just meant to be kind of a small, contemplative, comfortable space for folks to use. You'll see here, we're also providing a small shade shelter. Not necessarily shade, but also protection from the elements. So it would be a solid roof structure. The intent here being that you can enjoy the space even if there is inclement weather. It's also something we responded to with the Voices Against Violence programming that occurs at this outdoor classroom space. If they had a covered area they could go if it's raining or if it's a particularly hot and sunny day, that would really help their programming use down here. So we felt it served a dual purpose, both for kind of existing programming needs, but also just for regular people who want to come down and use this space. There would be a small structure there to keep them out of the sun or out of the rain. We are preserving the backstop. We might refurbish it a little bit, maybe replace the chain link fence, keep it blue. It seems like people really enjoyed that. But we're also proposing an opportunity for some interpretive signage or art, and we have some images of that. But something that might give people the option to tell a bit of a history of this space, of the park, of the community, try and kind of connect the past that a lot of people have a lot of memories about to the present and younger generations, and just continue that story that a lot of people have told us about. In order to make this a more level space, We are going to have to put in some small retaining walls to kind of level things out, but that also acts as seating. So there's, again, more opportunities to sit and gather in this space. And then one of the major interventions we're doing, as I mentioned, is really regrading the existing area to handle and manage stormwater runoff. The intention here being is we will construct a number of, we're calling them stone check dams, both coming from this drainage swale as well as the one just off the screen that we showed you earlier. But the intent here is for water to come in, kind of get slowed down or pond here a little bit before it goes through these stones and onto the next. And this is doing two things for us. One is it's slowing the water down because right now the water comes through here pretty quickly, and in certain areas we're starting to see erosion happening, which is just going to get worse. So it slows the water down. It encourages infiltration of that water and helps manage stormwater, very similar to the strategy that was constructed along Michigan Avenue, but continuing that down until it dumps off into the existing meadow area and kind of the existing swale or what used to be maybe a creek bed located here. We're also responding to some feedback that people were wanted to see some sort of water feature or responded to the use of water to make this something that makes the space more natural. There was discussions of fountains or things like that that we could try and do here. We did look into that. Logistically, it's a challenge getting the proper infrastructure down in place into this area. It would also be very expensive and be a maintenance challenge moving forward to keep a fountain functional. But what we thought we could do is by using these small check dams to sort of gather water, that you would have the effect of, shortly after a rainstorm, as water is draining through the space, you would have that sound of not cascading water, but water falling over stones or kind of a small creek type event to give that sound, that natural sound of water that kind of draws people into the space. It wouldn't be year round, but after rain, probably not even major rain events, there's a lot of water coming through this park. We were trying to capture that for a short period of time. And eventually everything would drain away. So, there wouldn't be issues with mosquitoes or standing pools of water for too long. But the intention is to just give a nod to that and try and use something that we have to manage anyways, in a way that adds something of value to the space here. And just to give you some examples of that, this is when we talk about the meadow restoration space. This is the aesthetic that we would be achieving there with that refocusing that drainage for a more wet meadow that can handle wet conditions, handle dry conditions, but really a more naturalized setting than some of what's there now. This is an example of that check dam and how you could get some water ponding behind it, but it would have opportunities for that water to kind of fall over those stones and cascade over them a little bit, and give you sort of a visual, but also the auditory input of kind of water moving through the space. This is an example of just a very small pavilion. It wouldn't match the size of the one that is up on Michigan Avenue, or Michigan Street, the Haberman Pavilion. It would be similar in aesthetic, but just a smaller version of that. But really, it's just meant to be a small space where people can gather in the event of rain or sun. This here is an example of that, an opportunity to do interpretive signage to tell community history, but to do it in a creative or artful way that is actually kind of draws people to it like a focal point in the space. And that's something we would continue to work through the design and get community input on. And then just in terms of, some of the materials we're choosing, obviously for the walls, we want to match some of the aesthetic that's already been established with these sandstone block retaining walls that were installed recently next to the trails, using that as our kind of retaining and seat walls to keep things natural, as well as upgrading some of the furniture, both at the outdoor classroom space and under the pavilion or under the new shade structure. Using keeping things natural. This is a bench that's created by Urban Tree, but they do a very good job of sourcing it for material that will not rot quickly. This is black locust, so it's rot resistant, naturally insect resistant. It can last a very long time. So upgrading some of the furniture that's there now to kind of meet the intent, but make sure we have longevity and durability in that material. And this is just a perspective rendering, kind of giving you an idea of how this space might look. You can see the pathway connections we're creating here, connecting people to the existing trails, to the outdoor classroom. This low retaining wall that helps us retain grade, but also provide seating opportunities, and just a small shade structure here with some seating underneath that people can gather under. But again, it's meant to be a small, informal space, and you can see kind of how the check dams and the rewilding of the space, for lack of a better term, so the ecological restoration aspect can really make it feel, for a space that already feels like it's kind of tucked within a grove of trees and kind of surrounding it and has a unique feeling. We want to enhance that and make it feel even more that way. Kind of just little green oasis surrounded by natural areas that people can gather in. And that is what we have to present today. So I will open the floor for anyone who has questions, comments. We'd love to know your thoughts. So thank you. And thank you for those who have seen this already and are hearing it a second time. I hope the second version was better than the first.
Okay, so far I like it. What would we, when we were outside, was that January to March when we had the little breakfast outside? And yeah, had to walk through because I had been literally down there in more years than I want to say. But, and I'm a little further away. I'm in Knoxville, but I like it. I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah,
I think it's an excellent idea. The water to come over the stones, a natural thing instead of, um, to me, putting a lot of money in a lot of concrete that's going to, you know, make it worse, possibly because it could shift. I don't know. But stones, I think, to me, is easily movable. You know, if you have to move them or what have you, it would be easier than having some type of giant construction thing going. But the water, yeah, because wherever the water is, yeah. But I like it.
yeah. It looks good to me too. I did have a question. Um, I had asked about a kind of a bronze commemorative plaque or something that might be embedded in the ground, or something that was above ground that would talk about the ballpark area and maybe some of the pioneers in Belsuga. Are we going to be able to include that?
We should, yeah. So one thing to note is we've done a preliminary cost estimate on this, and we even erred on the side of caution, but we included money for that sort of that opportunity for interpretive signage or art, something similar to this image here, kind of in the lower middle, to do exactly what you're talking about. So we made sure that that was built into our budget. So it was something that was really something great and something special, and not an afterthought.
Okay. Well, it's the design is, on the conservative side, and I think it's good. And, it reflects what what we all talked about, what we wanted. Um, and the two leading paths to, did you speak to that? Remember you had asked us, did we want the one long one that was kind of meandering around, or the one that went directly to the area?
Yes, yeah. We went through the pros and cons of that, and I did share that the feedback we got at the last meeting on October 17th was why not both?
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is take that feedback, and as we develop these plans, see if we can in fact do both. I think we want to make sure it's constructible. That's
Yeah.
important, and make sure we have the budget to do it. So we're
Mhm.
gonna try and fit both, and if we can't, we'll be sure to come back to the community and let you all know why. So you don't just show up here and we want to make sure expectations are set appropriately at key points. So we'll
Okay.
report out if there's issues.
I just have one. I'm just curious that the time, we have a timeline for things. Uh, you know, when can we expect the work to start, or where, what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Yeah, let me pull that up. So our next step, continue to collect feedback, but then we have to put this project out have a request for proposal for a design team, likely a group of landscape architect, engineer team to do the design development and get us through kind of construction documents and permitting and construction. So ideally, we're kicking that off the beginning of next year, because we're kind of sliding into the holiday season. So getting that RFP out and getting responses is challenging. So ideally, we have them on board early 2025. And then it should take about a year to get through the design and permitting phase of this.
Okay.
And that's variable. It's hard to put a date on it because we really never know where it's going to go once we get into permitting. It could be quick, it could take a long time. We have at least one meeting that we know of, the development activities meeting. That's a requirement of any project we're doing. Now, we've done engagement previous to that, but we still think that's a really good time for us to come back. We're kind of currently projecting that happening in July, but we don't really know. It could be sooner, it could be later. So there's at least one big community meeting, but Erin is going to continue. Erin, make sure I'm not speaking for you, but you're going to continue to attend community meetings and be able to provide updates throughout the life of this project. So it's not like you're not going to hear from us again until July. Erin will be providing you guys updates as we go along.
Right. I'll still attend Knoxville and BCG meetings. Miss Jennifer.
Oh.
Hi. Quick question. So Brandon, once the RFP is responded to, where can we have members of the community, a number to be determined on the selection committee, to review and then review the RFPs, help with selecting the ones for interviews, and then sit in on it, but be a part of the interviewing panel.
Yeah, we can definitely include the community on that. I'm not sure. We haven't figured out how we're going to structure it yet, whether we're going to do interviews or not. I think typically we only do interviews with consultants if there's like two really good teams and we don't know which one we want to pick, then we bring them in for an interview. Sometimes it's just you know who you want and then we go with them. But I think it's completely fair and appropriate to have the community weigh in on, when we get proposals, to see if you have a comfort level with who we're working with. And we can go over the pros and cons of each.
Okay.
I see no issue with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Related, Jennifer, I just wanted to know would there be opportunities for folks in the community to get some of these jobs? How is that a possibility? Is that something you would include somehow that community people could work on this project?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have specifics, but we're baking ideas for this. So one thing is we have kind of through a separate funding source, but it is funding a lot of our horticulture and forestry work in the park right now, for some of this existing restoration area, as well as some of the tree planting that we're going to be trying to gear up to do. So there might be an opportunity, and we need to work through the logistics with our horticulture and forestry team, but especially as it pertains to sort of the ecological restoration areas, installing them, maintaining them, getting them established, that's going to be a big effort that we don't want to put on a contractor per se. We think there's real opportunity there. So, and I think that's also something that will require sort of as part of the design process with the consultant team, is identifying what are those pieces of scope that can be easily carved out for community members to be paid to do versus having a contractor do all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the end of my question. I won't bring up the fountain again.
I love the idea of the fountain though, but I do understand.
Yeah, I do too. But when you ask people for their opinions, you have to be careful because they'll tell you.
we want opinions, and we do try to respond to them. We thought it was a good idea too, and then we tried to figure out how it would work, and
That's
it
where we
was
stuck.
it was challenging. Saul Wells, who's on our operations and visitor experience team, he manages some of the fountains that PPC is currently managing. And I kind of wanted to invite him to one of these meetings because I think he would say if I put another fountain in a park, he would throw me off a bridge. The maintenance, they're really challenging to maintain. And I think that at the end of the day, we didn't want to invest in something that wasn't going to be
Yeah, sustainable.
functional in the long term, right? And that doesn't help you guys. So that's your space. We want to make sure what we're doing is gonna be here for a long time.
Okay, we appreciate that.
Sure.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Oh, the timeline. What did we? Oh, you said in about a year. Well, we'll see how things move. I guess you can't always predict the timeline. I understand that.
Yeah, and again, yeah, and we're trying to be conservative with it based on, permitting is tricky, and can slow things up. There's potential for us to be able to start construction in the fall of 2025. We likely wouldn't be able to complete the project in that timeline, but we could potentially get things started and wrapped up in 2026. It's all going to depend on kind of that permitting process. And one thing we're always mindful of doing too is putting a project out to bid when you're going to get the best price and the most responses, and that is usually in the wintertime.
Yeah.
When contractors are lining up work for the next year, and they're looking at their yard with their equipment that's not being used and trying to figure out how they're going to pay their bills in 2026. That's when you get competitive pricing. It's when you get a lot of interest, and that right now for this timeline lines up really well, that we would be going out to bid kind of December, January, and lining up the project to start like soon as we can, as soon as the weather turns favorable for construction in 2026, and we would be completed in 2026. But now if there are opportunities to start sooner, we're definitely going to take advantage of that as well. So this timeline will get a little more clear as we get kind of into the thick of the design process in terms of what kind of permits do we need to go for, how's the approvals process going, are they requiring a lot of revisions, et cetera. So it'll come into focus in the next 6 months, I would say, and we'll have a better idea.
Okay.
I will just add that I think one of the things that we could use your help with is identifying any community members that have that can provide us with any context about the baseball fields. I know that during our walk, Mona, back in March, Dr. Bay said that he had some contacts that he thought we could interview to kind of get some of that information, because we want to memorialize it, right? So so if anybody has neighbors, friends, family members that we could interview to kind of gather some of that information, that would be really helpful. Hey, Nicole, any questions? I see you snuck in here.
No, I don't have any.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments?
No.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for your time tonight. We will be posting this recording on the Engage page. So I'll be sharing that out, so that folks that weren't able to participate in either of these meetings can watch the recording and get an overview of the project, and then they can reach out to Brandon or I with any questions they might have.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was lovely seeing you all again, and
All right.
we'll talk again soon.
Thank
All
you both.
Good
Thanks.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Nice.